We are on a run of big news breaking for these teams right after I drop their deep dive. So, Commanders fans, if Terry McLaurin gets traded tomorrow, I am so sorry. Welcome in, everybody, to the reveal of the number 14 team in my power rankings as we head into the start of the 2025 NFL season. And I think today's episode is going to come as one of the bigger surprise rankings in the series, as the Commanders here are going to come in ranked outside of the top 10 in my power rankings, despite the fact that they did make the NFC Championship game last year. And it's not that I don't think the Commanders can get back to the NFC Championship. Far from it. But as many of you guys know, there's a formula that I've built for this series that takes all of the coaching and positional rankings that we discuss in this series, and it gives me back these final team power rankings. And the reality for the Commanders is that there are a lot of individual aspects of this team that do need to improve if they are going to follow up what was truly one of the surprising out-of-nowhere team performances that I've ever seen last season. So this is going to be a really fun episode here today to break down what this team does so well, and then also to highlight some of those areas of this team that they do need to get to work and improve upon if things are going to go well for this team to meet their newfound lofty expectations. Before we do get started here, if you could do me a huge favor, take just a second to hit that like button down below. It really does help me out. I really appreciate it. And make sure you subscribe. It really does support these videos. It tells other people out on YouTube that you enjoyed the content, and it pushes it out to other NFL diehards just like you. And of course, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of these deep dives as we lead up to the number one team in my power rankings. But let's go ahead and get started. As we go throughout each chapter of this episode, we will be discussing each unit, the coaching staff, and each position group, and whether they got better, worse, or stayed the same this offseason. And that is going to begin here as we start with the coaching staff. And no need for the Commanders to make any change with this coaching staff that shattered expectations last season. So staying neutral with the coaching. But let's break down Dan Quinn's coaching unit here. And right out the gate here, I got to just put my hand up and say, I couldn't have been any more wrong about my analysis on this Dan Quinn hire. I was not a fan of this hire. I thought it was a low upside, retread defensive coordinator hire that, frankly, I just didn't agree with the process of pairing that with a young quarterback in Jaden Daniels. And obviously, that was a big part of the Commanders actually kicking off this series last offseason as my 32nd ranked team. They did eventually climb as high as 31 when the Patriots lost a bunch of members of their D-line in the middle of the summer. But still, I was not high on this Commanders team, and that's going to happen when you have a rookie quarterback that comes in and has one of the best rookie QB seasons ever, if not the best. But I also just wasn't super high on what Dan Quinn was going to bring to the table here, and geez, he just came in and he didn't just reset an organizational culture that has been horrible and broken for years here in Washington. He actually elevated things. And this was one of the toughest, best cultures in the NFL last year. And it was a reminder that there are different ways to be great head coaches in the NFL, not just these offensive guru types deserve praise, but for a Dan Quinn to really relate to players and inspire confidence in that locker room. And I just keep coming back to that word, the team culture aspect of building this team up. It just raises every individual aspect of this team, not just on his defense. And that's before we talk about how good of a defensive coach Dan Quinn is as well. But it was really fun to see this last season, and now heading into his second season here, you should have all of the confidence in the world if you're a Commanders fan that, you know, this organization is in good hands under the wings of Dan Quinn, and it's already showing up in my coaching rankings here. Dan Quinn does come in as my 18th head coach. You know, once you start to get to those mid-teens, there's some heavy competition to start climbing up these rankings, but definitely reason to believe he can continue to climb those if this team's is able to continue the success they had last season. But already reflected there, the overall coach and culture grade that I give these teams already inside the top half of the league with a B+ grade, ranking 12th to 15th. This team certainly earned some benefit of the doubt last season. So already some pretty respectable grades there from the sort of top-down coach perspective. But you also have to talk about Dan Quinn as the defensive mind coming in here too. He's not just a CEO, culture lord, if you will. He is here as well to help elevate this defense and at least oversee things on that side of the ball. And it was always going to be an impossible ask with where Washington's defensive roster was at last season for Dan Quinn's defense to be good in year one. That was a big reason why this team ranked in the 30s for me heading into last season. But we did see as the season went on, which is something we do see a lot with defensive coaches, is it just takes a little bit of time to get to know your players and their skill sets and put guys in the right positions to succeed. And certainly as the season went on, Washington's defense went from hard to watch in the first 8 or so games of the year where they were really bad to being a respectable, tough defense that at least was able to come out and have some more competitive performances to take some pressure off this offense that was really cooking from start to finish. And coming over from Dallas, where he really revamped that defense and had them as one of the better defenses in the league for a multi-year stretch there, we know Dan Quinn can also coach some defense. So the coach rankings for the Commanders on defense are very good too as well, ranking 4th to 6th for pass defense, where I will discuss Dan Quinn is especially good. Run defense coaching is a little bit lower, however. I don't think he's bad at coaching up the run, but that is one area that you would like to see a Dan Quinn defense prove that they can be great in. Those Cowboys defenses were always vulnerable against the run, and Washington again last year struggled to stop the run. So they are 10th to 14th for pass defense coaching, still not bad. And then while it is Dan Quinn's defense at the end of the day, Joe Witt Jr. does definitely deserve a shout out. I do think he's going to start to emerge as long as Washington's defense can start to produce at a higher level, as hopefully their talent base can climb up here over the next year or two. I do think Joe Witt is going to start to get into those conversations as who might be some of these defensive coordinators that teams might be considering if they want to go the defensive coach route as their head coach. Joe Witt has been really next to Dan Quinn for a while now, for a year in Atlanta, but 3 years in Dallas there. I do think he comes highly respected, and he's a big part of the pass game designs here. I think especially to working with a Steve Wilks in Cleveland, working with Dom Capers for a long time in Green Bay. Those are very zone match blitz heavy schemes, and we've seen some really creative blitzing looks from these Commanders, and I do think Joe Witt's ability to kind of contribute to designing free rushers and heating up the quarterback in the blitz game. I think Joe Witt deserves some credit and a nod in that phase here. But let's talk a little bit more about what the scheme looks like with this Commanders defense. It is certainly not the Dan Quinn Seattle cover 3 inspired defense that he originally came from with that Legion of Boom defense. In fact, that's really kind of the climax, I would say, of his coaching arc were his failures in Atlanta, basically trying to replicate that cover 3 defense as the rest of the league had started to figure it out a little bit more, having seen so much of that from Seattle's defense on a big stage, but also trying to replicate it without all of the talent they had in Seattle. Multiple Hall of Famers on that defense, if not 5 of them, 6 of them, geez. And, he failed in Atlanta. He really did. But when he got to Dallas, he took a hard look at what went wrong and completely changed the makeup of his defense. Still staying mostly in that single high structure mentality that you get from a cover 3 based defense, but leaning much more into man coverage and blitzing and running stunts up front and just being a much more aggressive mentality as a defense. And that is what I think of with Dan Quinn's scheme. And it's exactly what we saw here in Washington, where despite really a big turnstile with their cornerbacks, not having the ideal corners to run a lot of man coverage and cover 1, they still ran the 15th most cover 1 in the league, and then they ran the 12th most cover 3. So still certainly a lot of those cover 3 influences, but they were 28th in the NFL in quarters coverage, which really goes to show you that this is a deviation from where a lot of the league is at, where they want to play those match split safety quarters coverages. And then the Commanders also blitzed the 8th most in the NFL last year out of those cover 3 and cover 1 structures, really liking to send 5, even 6 guys after the quarterback at times. And then really leaning into these 2 linebackers especially was a big thing that Dan Quinn, as good defensive coordinators do, was able to look at his personnel and realize, all right, we don't have a great D-line to win with 4, but we have 2 linebackers that are diabolical blitzers. Frankie Louvu, who can even do a lot of the Micah Parsons stuff, which he got to use in Dallas, obviously, lining up off the edge and actually winning as a legitimate pass rusher. But Bobby Wagner, at this stage in his career, was also one of the more efficient, more powerful, crafty blitzing linebackers in the league last year. So sending those guys a ton, but with the threat of 2 different guys that can do that, making sure the offense didn't always know who was coming, where they were coming from, and causing a lot of that confusion. So starting to kind of figure that stuff out into the second half of the year was when we started to see some more effective defensive performances from this unit. So that is just the sign of a good defensive coach, though, right? Like figuring it out as the year goes on, and now heading into the next season with a little bit of an identity, with something that they know that they can do well, and then hopefully you can start to piggyback off of that and continue to get better as a defense. So they are, of course, in very good hands with Dan Quinn here, who very well might climb in these coaching rankings as well if they're able to repeat what they did last season. And it's really fun to see Dan Quinn, who is just a joy to watch, coach a football team. It's fun to see a guy like that be open-minded and evolve, because we saw years in Atlanta where he wasn't very flexible as a defensive coach, and he wasn't a particularly good head coach in his first run. It's looking like things are going to be much different this time around. So just a true tip of the cap to Dan Quinn and what he's accomplishing here already out the gate in year 1. But another big win for this Commanders team was the decision to bring in Cliff Kingsbury as the offensive coordinator. And for what it's worth, I know I was pretty much low on every aspect of this Commanders team last year, but the one thing that I actually pushed back on some of the hate was the Cliff Kingsbury hire. I actually said, this is a great hire. If you're going to get a defensive head coach, go get a guy in Cliff Kingsbury, who was not a good head coach in Arizona, but he's a great play caller, and really no one's going to be rushing to the table to hire him as a head coach. Now, he was so good last year that we already did get a little bit of buzz that he might get a second crack. It doesn't seem like there was too much realistic interest in that. It might be coming, and that's always a risk of having a defensive coach at the top of things, right? We saw that firsthand with Dan Quinn losing Kyle Shanahan, and then the Falcons falling apart after that. But Cliff Kingsbury in a very comfy setup right now to just focus on this offense, and it was beautiful last year. The perfect marriage of Cliff Kingsbury's scheme with a Jaden Daniels who can run this offense so well. Very similar to what Kyler Murray did in Arizona, but I think Jaden showed even a better propensity to attack the middle of the field, which in a Cliff Kingsbury kind of air raid style offense is really what this is. Being able to read those high lows over the middle of the field, to read out mesh, to run Y cross where you're not afraid to hit that second level dig if the linebackers start to take away those underneath crossing routes. I mean, really, mesh and Y cross are the core principles of a Hal Mummy, Mike Leach, Dana Holgerson offense. And I do want to quickly shout out, there's a book by S.C. Gwynn called The Perfect Pass. I often get asked, like, how do you learn about football? What are some good football books to read? Like, I want to get into analyzing the game. You guys, if you do not go and check out The Perfect Pass, especially Commanders fans, it is a amazing story and just written very, very well by the author there, S.C. Gwynn. But it gets into the weeds on, like, the evolution of the modern pro spread offense that is prominent in today's NFL. And a big part of that core concept, the air raid offense, the run and shoot pistol oriented offense, is to reduce the playbook down, simplify really good concepts like mesh and Y cross for the quarterback, ensure that the quarterback knows how to read those up against any different coverage he might see, and drill into the quarterback the idea of never pass up an open receiver. And Jayden Daniels was the definition of that. Just picking guys apart, just getting the ball out, consistently making that first read, was miles ahead within this offense than I expected from him as a rookie based on his LSU tape. And Cliff Kingsbury running this offense, I mean, there are very few minds in the world, and maybe nobody, unfortunately with the passing of Mike Leach recently, rip Mike Leach, amazing human, but there might not be anybody else in the world better at coaching this sort of like air raid offense. And the other thing about this is it's not just mesh and Y cross and those passing concepts. And you hear the word air raid and think it's just pass, 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 pass. As that book, The Perfect Pass, breaks down, and as we saw in Washington last year where they had a very prominent run game, it's not that these offenses don't want to run the ball. Actually, far from it. What they want to do is spread you out, use the threat of that pass to open things up for the run game, and also get into some of these pistol looks and shotgun formations where you can start to tap into the quarterback's ability to run the ball off of read options. And that was the defining strength of this run game in Washington last year that did finish top 10 in the league, despite the fact that they really didn't have great run blocking or even great running backs, honestly. But the threat of Jayden Daniels on top of the scheme here was a complete handful. And it's really fun to see Cliff kind of make the air raid, run and shoot, pistol, style offense cool again in the NFL. And not just Cliff maybe becoming a head coach candidate again, really perfecting this and perfecting his craft here in Washington, but also keep an eye on some of these other coaches, whether it's in the quarterback room with Tavita Pritchard and David Blau, or Anthony Lynn, who's their run game coordinator, maybe really learning a lot of pass game stuff to pair with his excellence as a running backs coach. There's more names here than just Cliff Kingsbury to keep an eye on. So this was one of the most well-run offenses in the league last year, and that's really exciting that just after 1 year here, we already have the Commanders basically with like top 10 offensive play design rankings here, ranking as high as 10th for their pass game coaching and as high as 8th for their run game coaching. And if we see a repeat of last season, those will only continue to creep up and up and up. So things are in very good hands with this coaching staff, which is a very fresh breath of fresh air for Commanders fans especially. But let's go ahead and move forward and start to get into the roster breakdown here, where now Jayden Daniels can get his spotlight, and with his superstar rookie breakout, no need for the Commanders to make any change at quarterback. So for their offseason changes, they are staying neutral in this group. But again, I got to hold my hand up and apologize. Not just was I wrong about how good Dan Quinn was going to be here, but I was especially wrong about Jayden Daniels and how good he would be out the gate. And it's not that I hated Jayden Daniels. I still had him as someone worth a top 10 draft pick and worth the risk for someone to bring in as their hopeful franchise quarterback. But I was hard on the Commanders for taking him over Drake May, and these guys have full careers still to play out. But obviously, the Commanders have the furthest thing from a regret in taking Jayden Daniels, who had arguably the best rookie quarterback season ever. I mean, I haven't really gone back and looked at like stats and efficiency and all this stuff throughout time. But certainly as long as I've been watching football, I don't remember a quarterback, number one, just going as far, a rookie quarterback going to a conference championship and being a core part of it, right? Not just getting dragged there by a great football team. Like Jayden Daniels was at the absolute forefront of everything they were doing. But it's not just stats and team success either. It's just watching the film on Jayden Daniels and scratching my head like, how do you defend this guy? For a rookie quarterback to be amidst all of the QBs in the league, one of the guys that you watch and just say, he has the answer to everything. It's like he was able to plug a Game Shark into the back of his helmet and just broke the game. We mentioned how he was just picking defenses apart, never passing up open reads within the structure of this offense, to just have complete command of knowing how to kind of dink and dunk and nickel and dime and pick apart these defenses. So impressive. But to have that while still looking out those impactful intermediate throws, those digs and the posts over the middle of the field, that frankly, watching him at LSU, I thought that was a question mark for him, and passing up a lot of those reads at LSU. So to take those huge leaps in his rookie season, and then also just the ability to attack the defense in the vertical passing game, dropping these dimes down the sideline to Terry McLaurin, like just the in-structure passing for him to be as methodical and as surgical as he was, blew me away. But then, of course, like all of the other things you think of with Jayden Daniels, the play extension, in that if you did take away the structured plays that he was so good at hitting in a way that so many rookie quarterbacks just don't, but if it wasn't there, he would have the answer to, bounce around in the pocket, get out of the pocket. The pocket presence was exceptional. The know-how of when and how to use his feet was next level. The game just felt slow. It felt like he was in the Matrix with his kind of spatial awareness to just find ways to move the chains and make plays happen with, of course, just unbelievable athletic ability to do that as well. What a headache trying to get Jayden Daniels off the field on third down last year. It really paralleled that of Lamar Jackson, who has reached that level of annoyance in the NFL. So for that to be there as a rookie was just unbelievable. You can talk about the clutch factor with him that you really felt in his rookie season. I'm excited to see if he can keep this up. I mean, he is already on a historic pace in terms of like, who's the quarterback you want in the fourth quarter on the road with a loud crowd and all the pressure in the world on you. Like, you couldn't watch a Jayden Daniels game last year where they won all these close games. Man, this is just a cool cat. Like, nothing phases him. And that was the thing that kept getting covered on him, was just how poised he is in those high pressure situations, not just for a rookie, but for any quarterback. So that was very real with him. That's obviously something that has been a defining trait of someone like Patrick Mahomes, where it's like, who do you want to have the ball with the game on the line? Well, Jayden Daniels was that fire-breathing dragon last season as well. So that's huge. And then the last thing to rave about on him before we move on is the impact in that design run game. This Commanders team, without much of an offensive line, Washington finished 7th in the NFL in offensive rushing DVOA last year. I can't imagine they were even top 20 without Jayden Daniels' impact. The numbers advantage he brings to the table, creating advantageous looks for the offensive line where there's one less guy to block, the running back where there's one less guy to tackle you. But then Jayden getting the ball himself was really fun to watch. He had his fair of explosive runs for sure, but honestly, where he was most special for me were those 3rd and 3s, 3rd and 2s, where he would get the keeper, and then he had 52 missed tackles forced last season. That was the most among any quarterback in the entire NFL. That does include scrambles as well, but you certainly felt it watching the tape on those 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3s, where you thought you had him dead to rights, you had the right play call on him, you ran a scrape exchange, the slot cornerback got off a block and was in a position to get Jayden Daniels. You thought you were getting the Commanders off the field. Nope. He just slips through you, gets the 3-4 yards he needs, and you got a fresh, pair of downs and basically a brand new drive. And the defense just continues to get more and more exhausted because you get so much of that on 3rd down too, where you think you got the perfect pass defense on you, and you do, but he eludes a sack. Again, those 52 missed tackles forced, and he's able to just slip right up the middle and get another pair of first downs. So that was what you think about with the Commanders' defense, was really the ability to, I don't want to just use the term nickel and dime, but that idea where, they weren't like, they had their fair share of explosive plays, but it was more of those like death by 1,000 cuts that really became so much to handle for this defense. And that was just all Jayden Daniels kind of putting the team on his back in those situations. So just such a special player. I mean, he's already shown an upside with how good he was making the right reads and attacking defenses from the pocket. He's already shown more there that I think we've already seen a higher upside from Jaden Daniels that I projected from him as a prospect. And I mean, we're just sniffing the surface here, right? Like what we saw last year is, it's potentially elite quarterbacking for the long haul here. Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow type of stuff. If he repeats it in year 2, we'll probably be in that territory. Now, as we head into his second season, he's not quite there yet, but he is the 7th overall quarterback for me. He is 8th in passing, and then also 2nd in the NFL for that run game impact that these quarterbacks can offer as well. So Jaden Daniels is the engine of this offense, the heartbeat of this entire football team, and really captures what was so special about this team's run last year and how this team, at the end of the day, if they're going to get back to the NFC Championship, it's going to be in large part on his shoulders again. And honestly, more often than not, when there's a player that gets this much hype and he's this young, I often do pump the brakes a little bit and find weaknesses that I feel the need to call out. I just didn't see it in Jaden Daniels' tape. Not a lot of weaknesses, like the occasional missed throws over the middle of the field. Okay, maybe the occasional processing miss for a rookie, but I'm not worried about that, right? He's a freaking rookie. So just the utmost respect for what he's done, and the arrow absolutely should be continuing to point up on him too. We got to at least mention the backup quarterback here before we move on to the rest of this roster. Marcus Mariota has settled in really nicely too in this air raid style offense. Much closer to what he did at Oregon, I think, but he did have to play the majority of that Panthers game, granted against the Panthers defense, but this offense kind of didn't miss a beat with Mariota stepping in, and he made some big throws, and he kind of looked like his old self, the former first-round pick. I think as a backup here, it is a very healthy setup. I don't know that anybody is watching, him being a perfect fit within how this offense is designed and being like, yeah, let's pluck a 31-year-old Marcus Mariota to be a starter for us. But at least for Washington to know if Jaden is going to get beat up, which honestly, if anything's going to slow him down or derail the skyrocket trajectory he's on, it is that he's a slender, more of a slender build. If he's going to miss a game, though, you feel pretty good that Marcus Mariota can keep you in it, and you don't have to really mix up your playbook or anything like that. So he's a very nice backup. Showed last year that he might be one of the best backups, true backups in the NFL today. And they also have Josh Johnson. It's hard to keep track of if he was on the practice squad here last year, or if they just picked him up for this year. This guy has played on more NFL teams than maybe anybody ever, but he himself could probably do some of the stuff with his feet and distributing the ball within this offense. But let's go ahead and move forward to our next position here with the weaponry. And as far as their offseason changes here, this team did shake some things up with their pass catchers from last season. Now, Commanders fans are hoping not to see Terry McLaurin's name show up on this list, who is requesting a trade because for some godforsaken reason, Washington doesn't want to just pay him. I will say this. I am optimistic that they will figure it out, because if I'm Washington looking at this thing, there is no good reason to not just pay him. At 30 years old, he's done everything you could possibly ask for him with abysmal quarterback play for so long here. He finally gets the right quarterback, and he has a monster season. There's no physical sign of a regression. He's awesome. Give him the 3, even 4-year deal. You have Jaden Daniels on a rookie contract. It would be devastating if Washington couldn't figure this out. I don't care what the return is. It's not going to be better for your team this year that has expectations. So for me, Washington has to look at it that way and get this thing figured out. I don't think we see him traded, but we would have to have a reactions video if he was traded. And frankly, this team would possibly fall in the power rankings, depending what that trade looks like for them. But I did want to get that out of the way. But as far as asking if the pass catchers got better or worse throughout this offseason, at wide receiver, I say neutral / to be determined. There's some kind of wild card X factor type of additions with these wide receivers, but they lose Diami Brown, who played well, especially down the stretch for them last year. He goes to Jacksonville on a 1-year, $10 million deal, and Olamide Zaccheaus, who played really well for them in the slot last year for what he is, and even Jamison Crowder. Not a huge loss there, but for what it's worth, Crowder did play well at the right time. He had a really nice performance in that big Detroit playoff win. But then their additions, Deebo Samuel coming off a massive down season, so much so that I can't even call this a big addition. By name it is, but if Deebo is what he was last year, that's just going to be an adequate addition. So that's one of those wild card adds here. Then you have a rookie addition here in Jalen Lane. Obviously, we don't know fully what we're going to get from him. And then Michael Gallup as well. Once upon a time, one of the better number 2 wide receivers in the league, but he is going to come out of retirement and join, a lot of friendly faces here in Washington with a lot of Dallas influence here. So I said neutral / to be determined. This could be upgraded if all these additions hit, or it could actually be worse from what they had last year, depending how those guys play out. And then no change at tight end, staying neutral there. But let's get into it. So for the Commanders' weaponry, I have them with a B+ grade, ranking 10th to 13th in the league. That is, of course, fully dependent on whether Terry McLaurin is here. Again, we are going to operate under the assumption that they figure this out and retain him for hopefully long haul here. But God, was it fun to see Terry McLaurin get real quarterback play. We've known this whole time that he is a true number 1 wide receiver, capable of the type of season he had last year. And even with poor quarterback play, he's been a 1,000-yard receiver type of guy. But the 82 receptions and most notably 13 touchdowns, just getting on the board for this team, making big plays in the biggest of spots. And then if you include the playoff performances, he did have the most yards he's ever had. Big playoff performances that stopped him just short of 1,400 total yards on the season. But if you're looking for a stat that really tells you how impactful he was, I think it's his 66% contested catch win rate, which was 4th in the NFL. The 3 guys ahead of him were Jacoby Myers and Amon-Ra St. Brown, where their contested catches are more of those like in-breaking digs and ones where you're kind of getting hit after the catch and securing it, which are still impressive, but a different breed compared to a lot of the targets Terry gets. And then you had Rome Odunze was number 1, but he had just 18 contested catch targets compared to 38 for Terry McLaurin. So an even bigger sample size on Terry. But to just have that guy down the boundary that was going to locate the ball, go up and over defensive backs, make tough contested catches, like contorting his body at the sideline, just the, put it up in the air, having a quarterback that can get it out there for him, made all the difference in the world in the biggest of spots for this team. And then a lot of these big after the catch plays too, showing off the speed to outrun an NFL defense at the second level, to house call a lot of these plays. So yeah, Terry, just a true number 1. They got to get this figured out. He's a core part of what they do. Outside of Jaden Daniels, he is the next most important player on this football team. I have a hard time finding an argument for anybody else. Maybe we'll see Laramie Tunsil can be that guy this year. But this team doesn't sniff the top half of the league in terms of weapons without Terry McLaurin. Get it done. That's all I have to say. But they do have other guys that, as long as Terry is there, being the go-to target in this offense, everybody else can kind of play their role, and this group makes a lot more sense as long as he's here. So Deebo Samuel gets brought in here, and a healthy Deebo Samuel is a brilliant complement to Terry McLaurin as a short to intermediate dominator, a designed touch guy, where in this offense you do see a lot of bubble screens and creative ways to get the ball into the hands of your playmaker type. Last year it was Diami Brown and Olamide Zaccheaus. Those were nice players, but compared to Deebo in his prime, who was the premium elite run after catch wide receiver in the league for 3-4 years, those guys don't hold a candle. So if Deebo can get back to his old self, you are talking about just a whole new wrinkle into this offense that can add on top of everything we said about how annoying Jaden Daniels is to defend, on top of Terry McLaurin, who's a top 5 vertical threat in the league, and that's including your Jamar Chases and A.J. Browns in that elite of the elite tier, stretching the field in that role. If you then have to deal with a Deebo Samuel who's getting the ball in all of these creative, annoying ways that's impossible to tackle for slot corners and safeties, like that could really be an X factor for this entire offense. But I just don't know if that's what Deebo Samuel is anymore. He turns 30 years old this year, and I know we said Terry at 30 years old isn't showing any sign of slowing down, but in the case of Deebo Samuel, you have to almost look at him more like a running back, because not only have the Niners given him 254 carries in his time in San Francisco, but just the types of receptions he gets where he's getting smacked over the middle of the field on a crosser or a dig, or he's catching the ball on a bubble screen with guys getting, build up speed to hit him. He has way more violent touches than any receiver in the league at 30 years old, I would argue. So it didn't come as a huge surprise for him last season to continue to get banged up, where he has been banged up consistently throughout his career. But for his missed tackles forced to drop from, the last 3 years, he had 27, 36, and 33 missed tackles forced just as a receiver. Last year, he had 15, about half of where he's been. We've also seen his yards after catch per reception steadily drop down. 10.8 in that one elite, super breakout season that he had, where he was an offensive player of the year candidate in 2021. 10.8 that season, 9.6 the year after that, 8.7 the year after that, last year 8.2. Still not bad. He's still Deebo at the end of the day. That's still what he does best. But if that continues to drop off, he's very Diami Brown-esque in terms of efficiency after the catch. So this was a move where it's hard, because I understand what they're going after, and they trade a 5th round pick, and it's just a 1-year contract. How he fits in here, if he can be healthy, I get it. But I'm very terrified that they're not going to have him at that level that they're hoping he will be, or that he'll even be available at all. So he is the biggest wild card for this offense, I think, because of what he could mean for this offense at his best, and because, as we're about to talk about, there's just not a lot of impact players with the rest of this group of weapons, hence another huge reason why they have got to figure this out with Terry McLaurin. But we'll continue to go through the pecking order here. Next, we will talk about Zach Ertz. And look, Ertz, I think the defining slogan on him should be, unironically, still got it. He had those years in Arizona after Philly traded him away, and Dallas Goedert obviously was their go-to tight end. They didn't have a need for Ertz anymore. But he goes to Arizona, and, he just kind of looked like it was over, right? 33, going on 34 years old there in Arizona, just, was a possession tight end, looked like he had slowed down, and we kind of just wrote him off when he gets signed here with Washington. But he very much bounced back. And at 34 years old last year, will turn 35 this year, he can still get open for a tight end. He still catches everything. He still is a great trust throw target for Jaden Daniels over the middle of the field, and works well with him in scramble drill. He is a crafty, usable receiving tight end. And in the role of being a number 3 or 2B in an offense like this, very practical. Do you want to have to count on him to be a separator or be a large part of your passing progressions or anything like that? No, absolutely not. But I did see a guy that can still play on tape, and there's probably, frankly, a lot of fantasy football value there, because I think people just see the name Zach Ertz at 35 years old and just kind of scoff at it still. But you shouldn't. I mean, he had 66 catches, 654 yards, and 7 touchdowns last year. And the chemistry with him and Daniels climbed as the season went on. So that should absolutely still be there. And he earned a contract extension here too. So I like him for where he's at and what he is. And then I like Noah Brown as an X wide receiver here. Do you wish he had a little bit more juice on the outside there? Yeah, but if, he's number 4 and he's got a specific role in this offense and he run blocks and he's tough, I think he's just fine. And he is actually their X. That's not to say Terry McLaurin can't be an X, not in the slightest, but because you have Noah Brown you can put him on the line and have to see a little bit more press coverage and run block, and play that role. Terry can be moved off the line a little bit more, move him into the slot a little bit, and get the absolute most out of Terry's skill set as that Z flank or deep threat type. But yeah, I think Noah Brown running digs, being a perimeter target, for what he is, again, is just fine here. If you move Terry and Noah Brown has to be your number 1, like down the field wide receiver, that all of a sudden would become a big, big problem. He just isn't the most dynamic separator or trustworthy guy in a pinch, but he has made some really tough catches. And I would also say he's an underrated route runner as well. He's a very nice player. Missed a lot of time last year, but in 11 games, he had 453 yards and a touchdown. So don't sleep on him in a full season, having a more productive season. If you're in a deeper fantasy league or like underdog best ball drafts, like last round type of draft pick type of guy, I wouldn't sleep on him as like a productive player inside this offense, especially with Debo and the big name there kind of probably making people forget about Noah Brown, but seems he's healthy after a little bit of a scare earlier this season and should be, good to go and make his presence felt here. And then you do have Austin Eckler, still has it as well at 30 years old as a running back. Not, doesn't quite have the juice that he once did and the big play threat ability, but he's awesome on screens. He's still one of the better route running backs in the league. He can hang in there in pass pro and do his best effort in that phase. So you're still going to see a lot of Austin Eckler. He caught 35 receptions in 12 games last year. He is certainly someone that you're worried about getting banged up as well. But yeah, again, everybody here in their role makes a ton of sense as long as Terry is here. But then we can get into the depth here, starting with the wide receivers. So Luke McCaffrey, I'm curious where Washington fans are at with him. I was definitely not a fan of this draft pick. I had a 6th round grade on Luke McCaffrey. They drafted him in the 3rd round, and in his rookie season, I think we saw kind of my concerns on him where he is new to the wide receiver position. He's just not fully polished. But more so, I just don't think he's an NFL caliber athlete for this position group. I think NFL corners are able to stay on top of him in coverage pretty easily. And I just don't think he's that dynamic of an after the catch threat or anything like that to really be a standout NFL player, which, look, if you take a guy in the 3rd round, you're hoping that guy emerges as a starter. Can he be a good return man and a gunner on special teams and someone that can play inside or out as a wide receiver 5, wide receiver 6 type for you, where in his role right now, that's kind of what he is? That's totally fine. But I'm certainly not expecting a breakout season from Luke McCaffrey or him to get starting playing time or anything like that. Technically, if Debo does get hurt, Luke would probably be more of their slot guy. But I just, his targets and usage would go up in that situation, but I just don't really see him taking the bull by the horns in that role either. So I'm just not a huge fan of his game. Would obviously be fun to see it, Christian's brother, all that fun story. Not just that, but the son of Ed McCaffrey. But at the end of the day, I always felt like those bloodlines were overrating him as a prospect, and the Commanders kind of bit the cheese on that one. We'll see, though. I am excited about Jalen Lane, however, 4th round pick this year. And I'll just say it, Jalen Lane as a prospect compared to Terry McLaurin as a prospect, a lot of similarities there. Speed for days, vertical threat ability, good tape when used, but went severely underutilized because of the quarterback play he dealt with in college and the usage within his offense. Jalen Lane very much feels like one of these capable deep threats that, if plugged into the right role with the right quarterback play and enough trust in the offense to see those high leverage targets, can really emerge as an impact out of day 3 of the draft. If there's any logic to this team saying, we don't want to pay Terry McLaurin into his 30s at $35 million a year, I would disagree with you moving him, but if there's any logic to it, it is that Jalen Lane maybe looks great in camp and they think he can play that role, and in time replace Terry McLaurin, at least a lot of the stuff that he does in this offense. I doubt that Lane will ever be the ball winner that Terry is. It's one thing to get open deep and play that role and be something like a Darius Slayton, maybe Hollywood Brown. It's another thing to actually make those tough catches when there is a DB on you. But I did like the pick in Jalen Lane, and if an opportunity comes his way, we have seen that Jaden Daniels can utilize a player like that. So it was a good draft pick and a talented player for where they drafted him. And then Michael Gallup's another wild card here. You know, it's tough to imagine a clear role for him, even if he does make this team and looks like he's back in shape. You know, Noah Brown has this job. Brown earned that role last year. So, Gallup would be your backup perimeter receiver. In his prime, he had more explosive juice than someone like Noah Brown. Both these guys were in Dallas together in that same, possession number 2 wide receiver role for Dak Prescott. Gallup also probably more trustworthy in his prime. Are we expecting him to be in his prime or maybe even make this team? It's a why not dart throw for the Commanders. They don't need anything from him, but if he bounces back, similar maybe to how Zach Ertz did for this team last year, sure, why the hell not? And then KJ Osborne, that's another reason like Luke McCaffrey maybe wouldn't even be that exciting if Debo isn't able to go for you. I mean, KJ Osborne's probably a better slot wide receiver than Luke McCaffrey, so Osborne probably at risk of getting cut here, but you could even keep him as your practice squad top receiver off the bench, in the event of injury to call him up. I don't think anybody's really rushing the table to pick KJ Osborne up, but he has had some productive seasons and is another veteran body to have around here, which is nice. But then you go to your tight end depth. John Bates will play a lot because he is a really strong, good blocking tight end. They will run their fair share of quote-unquote 12 personnel, where Zach Ertz is actually their starting slot wide receiver, and then John Bates is able to stick his hand in the dirt and block. Bates is good after the catch, but in terms of route running, not so much. And in 20 games last year, he caught 11 passes, but for 115 yards. So he's getting about 10 yards a pop, able to kind of turn up field and make a guy miss. So you could maybe even tap into him a little bit more there, but there's just not a lot of quickness and agility to actually separate. It's more of hey, the defense lost him off of play action underneath, that kind of stuff. But you at least have to mention him. And then Ben Sinnott, fantasy owners were devastated that Zach Ertz did reemerge here because Ben Sinnott was a really fun second-round pick, and that's obviously pretty significant draft capital. I like Ben Sinnott, and eventually he's going to get his opportunity. A great guy to learn behind Zach Ertz, and if Zach Ertz goes down, you're going to be really immediately excited to see what Sinnott could be. Honestly, outside of Deebo Samuel and what he might still have in the tank, Ben Sinnott probably is the next highest upside piece here, depending on how you view him and Jalen Lane there. But there could be more of an impact receiving entity there in Ben Sinnott, kind of in the image of a Trey McBride, 6'4", 240-ish pounds, nice after the catch, a lot of speed for the position. He's not a horrible blocker. He just, played a lot of fullback and F tight end at Kansas State. So he's got to learn the technique of run blocking, but he's got a little bit more run blocking potential than someone like Zach Ertz. And within this system, we know they can tap into that type of player. So I'm excited when he does get that opportunity. I just don't know that that's going to come this year, but definitely dynasty leagues. I wouldn't sell your Ben Sinnott stock. Then it's, players competing for depth. Cole Turner and Lawrence Cager are kind of that receiving entity type of tight end in here as well. Maybe they keep an extra body there. Colson Yankoff was on this team last year, not too familiar with his game. But then the other receiving backs, you're not going to get a ton from this group with Eckler as long as he's healthy, but Brian Robinson can turn up field and be an impact in the screen game. Jeremy McNichols has a little bit of juice. They do have Demetric Felton competing for a roster spot. He's fascinating to kind of come in and learn from Austin Eckler. Felton was kind of a half receiver coming out of college. He does have upside in the receiving game. I wouldn't mind keeping him on the practice squad, and then if Eckler did get hurt, maybe you do see him come in as the primary third down option. There's still maybe something in the tank there for him. But that is going to round out this group of weapons that, again, as long as you've got Terry McLaurin, this is flirting with being a top 10 group of weapons in the league because Terry is a top 7 or 8 receiver in the NFL, and you've got everybody else behind him falls into the right role. If they trade Terry, we're going to have to make a post-reaction video about how that would change the landscape of things here, but hopefully they can get that done. But let's go ahead and move forward to the full backfield breakdown here and take a look at their offseason changes with the running back room, where I do say slightly upgraded. It's going to be mostly the same guys. They don't lose anybody, but they did add an intriguing piece in Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt in the 7th round out of Arizona. But at running back, I have the Commanders with a very solid ranking, a B- grade, gets them 21st to 23rd in the league. This is a very solid group that very much allows this team to do what they need to do in the run game, but maybe not a group that's going to maximize this run game and get the absolute most out of having a rushing threat in the backfield, kind of like what we saw last year with Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry getting paired with Lamar and Jalen Hurts. Like there is room to find a guy, maybe not of that caliber, but that can be more of a difference maker to really help this run game take that next step up. But these guys are solid. You got Brian Robinson, big, tough runner, okay vision, better speed than he gets credit for. He does have some breakaway ability. That might be the best trait about him, is to just kind of like put a stiff arm on or truck a linebacker. And then, you know, if he can smell the end zone, he has enough to get it done. And he had a pair of 40-yard runs last year. So I guess as kind of like a poor man's Derrick Henry, as your bruiser here in this Commanders run game, he can accomplish that. He's heading into a contract year though, and I don't know if he's gonna show enough, take an extra leap or anything like that to get a contract here. It wouldn't stun me, but I think most likely this team is looking at some of these other backs or maybe would entertain a free agent signing. Not to keep making those Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley parallels, but those guys were free agent additions. But yeah, he's good. He's solid. And then you got Austin Eckler, who's going to be the lightning to that Thunder. And Eckler had some scrappy runs last year, man. Like, obviously, he's here mostly to take Brian off the field on third downs, where Brian Robinson doesn't have the route running ability and movement skills out in space. But, Eckler had some tough third down conversions. Showed that he still has good vision and that nose to have some tough runs, even if he is a smaller back. He's got to take better care of the football. The fumbles have really started to tally up for him, and it's holding him back. He has, freaking 17 fumbles in the last 4 seasons, and it's not like he's getting a crazy high workload either. That's with an average of just 175 touches in each of those seasons. So got to take better care of the football. But yeah, as a compliment to a Brian Robinson, this group does just make sense. It's not one to write home about or anything like that, but it works, and it worked last year. You do have a handful of interesting names after them, though. As long as Robinson and Eckler are healthy this year, we probably don't see too much of these other guys. But you got some other options. I mean, Jeremy McNichols very much can step into Austin Eckler's role if Eckler goes down. Very similar body types, that kind of jitterbug type. And dude, McNichols had some really impressive runs last year. When this backfield was banged up, you thought maybe you would see a drop off from this running back room, but dude, he had some runs on tape where you're like, I did not know Jeremy McNichols was capable of brushing off a linebacker, trying to tackle him and make some scrappy runs happen, considering this is a guy that's bounced around the league. So as a backup to Austin Eckler, I do like him. I don't think he's a long-term piece or anything like that. He also turns 30 this year, along with Austin Eckler. And then you got Chris Rodriguez, who, depending on what they see from Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, which right now they actually, at least on our lads, they're listing Merritt above Rodriguez. Sometimes that's just random. Sometimes that is going off of like who's getting more snaps in practice and that kind of stuff. But anyway, I do think Rodriguez makes this team because he's actually been really solid when he's had to get carries here. It hasn't been very often. But when Brian Robinson was beat up, they went to Rodriguez as that kind of thumper role. Both these guys are, over 220 pounds. And Rodriguez had a 94-yard game against Tennessee on 13 touches. He had 52 yards on 11 touches as well, week 9 against the Giants. What stands out to me, he had 14 missed tackles forced on just 35 attempts. It's a missed tackle force rate about 45%. That is rare territory, obviously on a short number of attempts and not against the best defenses there with the Giants and the Titans, but that was kind of what he did well in college, meeting you in the hole, making a guy miss, turning a 4-yard gain into an 8-yard gain. We saw a lot of that in his limited looks. So if you're talking about, before we even get to Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, do they have someone that they feel like can step in for Brian Robinson and you don't have to pay him long term? I do think he's on the roster right now. It just depends on how they feel about these guys and how they want to spend their money. But Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, hard name to roll off the tongue there, but he is the wild card in this running back room. In a very deep running back draft, he completely fell through the cracks because he transferred to Arizona, played a game, looked incredible, and then NCAA told him he couldn't play anymore because he violated some sort of transfer eligibility rules, which sucks for him. But he goes to the Shrine Bowl and he wins, I think, the Offensive Player of the Week at the Shrine Bowl. And I was surprised, frankly, that he lasted to the 7th round. And I think it was mostly just because of the depth of the running back class. But he is a guy that really stands out as someone with legit lead back potential. He has the size, speed, traits that you look for at this position, and had some of the production in college as well when he was out there in his one game last year, and certainly the year before that. 1,200 yards at New Mexico in his 5th college season. Probably could have declared and tried to sneak onto an NFL roster, but he wanted to challenge himself and go to the Pac-12, and unfortunately that journey was ended short for him. But an interesting running back with explosiveness and a very violent running style as well. He just puts his foot in the dirt and has these sharp, aggressive cuts. It's kind of like Nick Chubb-esque. I don't want to go like Adrian Peterson-esque, but that's the style that AP ran with, where he just put his back foot in the dirt, cross your face, really quickly and explosively. Similar style there. So excited to see if he could get an opportunity. As a 7th round pick, you're not counting on it, but I spent a lot of time on him because if you are in dynasty leagues or even as a last round dart throw in a best ball draft, because Brian Robinson and Eckler have gotten banged up, this could be a case where if Krosky-Merritt starts to get some carries week 6, week 7, and he is able to hit his upside, which I do think is large, it could be a case where he's so good that they don't have any need to go back to Brian Robinson or Austin Eckler, and they found a guy. It's not unheard of for late round draft picks to be hits, especially guys with the narrative of a Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, that if he got to play his final season at Arizona, maybe he is more of a 3rd or 4th round pick. So very excited for that draft pick right there. But that's really all we got for this running back room. We mentioned Demetric Felton could be interesting as well as more of a receiving back role. And we obviously mentioned Jaden Daniels earlier for the high impact in the QB run multiplier, where the Commanders are 2nd in the league. A huge contribution to this run game there from the QB. But let's move forward and talk about this offensive line that is obviously going to be important as well in terms of this team's ability to run the football. As far as the offseason changes for the Commanders on the O-line, I said massively upgraded. Their only loss there, Cornelius Lucas, nice player, journeyman, kind of emergency starting tackle for so many teams throughout his time in the league. But 2 major additions at tackle. Laramie Tunsil just might have been the best individual move that any team made this entire offseason. I think the world of this addition for Washington. An elite pass blocking left tackle. And then they spent a 1st round pick on Josh Connerly as well, who doesn't even need to start here, but was certainly worth that pick in the 1st round as well, and should be their franchise right tackle opposite of Laramie Tunsil. And whenever Tunsil does hang it up, Connerly can slide back over to the left. So really good additions there. Again, massively upgraded on the O-line. Let's break this group down. So right now, I do have this group ranking smack dab in the middle of the league, ranking 15th overall for the offensive line. A little bit better in terms of pass blocking, where they rank 13th to 14th. And then run blocking, a little bit lower, 23rd to 25th. but it is a very solid group. And then there is some upside here for this to be an even better ranking unit than that, with some wild cards on this offensive line. But at left tackle, you should know what you're getting here in Laremy Tunsil, who has just been an absolute rock throughout his career. He did just on Saturday, turned 31 years old, but I have seen no clear signs of physical regression. I can't even remember if Washington gave him an extension yet or not, but I fully expect him coming in here. He will get a multi-year extension, and they're going to expect him to play till he's 34, 35 years old here, I would think. But to not even have to give up a first-round pick to get one of the best offensive tackles in the league is tremendous value, despite the age, despite what you have to pay him. I mean, he is in the conversation for who the best pass-blocking left tackle in the league is. Lane Johnson, the better overall pass blocker, but he's on the right side. And then, we could probably throw Tristan Wirfs, we have to remember, is a left tackle now. Like, he's probably in that debate. And then other than that, maybe I'm shortchanging someone, but Tunsil's of that quality. You can really set it and forget it as a team builder, and especially as a quarterback on the blind side there. Like, Jaden Daniels just is not going to have to worry about that backside protection in a way that he really kind of did last year with Brandon Coleman playing a lot of left tackle. Cornelius Lucas was okay there. Trent Scott had to play some last year. Just was not nearly what they should be getting in Laremy Tunsil there. Now, he's not of that caliber as a run blocker. I think he gets a little bit too much hate as a run blocker, but he's just not as good moving forward as he is moving backwards. And he doesn't have the consistent mean streak in the run game that you maybe would prefer to see, but he still knows his assignments. He's still very strong. He's still a good run blocker as well. So a massive addition there with Laremy Tunsil. And then it'll be interesting to see what looks like right now. Brandon Coleman is poised to compete for and win that left guard spot. And I like that. I questioned the idea that Coleman was going to be a tackle for them. And I do think in his rookie season, we saw some flashes, certainly, but for every impressive win, it felt like it was mirrored with an ugly loss. And I just see an athlete that is a guard for the NFL level. And you could try to talk yourself into like, all right, maybe he could develop as a tackle and be an okay player there. I really think like his tools, like he could be a legitimately good high-end guard for you. So that's an extra bonus to going to get Laremy Tunsil, is you're not continuing down the Brandon Coleman path that to me was always questionable, but moving him inside makes so much more sense. So I'm excited to see him. I still think there's cases of him on tape falling off blocks in the run game, missing assignments, missing with his hands, and having clunky feet in pass pro. Like, he's far from a guarantee. These things don't always work, but I think he has a much better chance as a guard. And you saw enough flashes from him as a rookie where it's like, let's see where this goes. Let's give him a chance. So this is a big wild card for this offensive line and this offense in general, is how well he can play. This is a weak link position group, and the rest of these guys shouldn't be weak links. Brandon Coleman could be, or he could be closer to a strength for them. So it's a big year two for him, certainly. And it's not like he's super young. He's a 25-year-old prospect. He had 6 years coming out of TCU. So I don't think he's going to have a crazy long runway at his age, making this a bigger year for him and his career trajectory. But then at center, you got Tyler Biadasz, who, if there's a starting offensive lineman in the league who is the definition of an adequate starter or an NPC, as the kids say, it's Tyler Biadasz as a center. That's what he was in Dallas. That's what he was last year. Just, below average athletic traits, but above average toughness and awareness at the position. He's going to take his losses from not being able to get to a landmark or getting out quicked or losing on a bull rush. Like, the physical demands of this position matter, and he can't match a lot of the top freaky defensive tackles and what they bring to the table. But he is a solid piece. In an ideal situation, if he's going to start for you, he would be your fifth best player. And with the upside of Coleman and the long-term upside of a Josh Connerly, there's a case where that could happen. So he's just fine. And then at right guard, this is another wild card for this team with Sam Cosmi, not because of the player he is, but because he is coming off of an ACL tear that he suffered at the back end of last season. And it wasn't even in the regular season. It was in the divisional round playoffs in late January against the Lions. So, like, the start of the season is right around the 9-month mark, which is like a miracle recovery timeline for an ACL injury. The reports on him are like he is way ahead of schedule, and this is going brilliantly, which is something that honestly bumped the Commanders up in these rankings. When I put this all together back in early May, I was under the assumption that Cosmi would probably not be available for the first half of the season, and then it was like, we'll see where it goes. We have seen some really unfortunate attempts at recovering from ACL injuries, even in recent NFL seasons, from offensive linemen. So it's still scary, but it does seem like we're getting an optimistic outcome in this recovery, in that he's already starting to kind of warm up and could be available to practice like even like late training camp here. So he still might miss a couple games, but the fact that it's looking pretty good for his recovery here certainly bumped up these offensive line rankings and has me feeling a little bit better. But very, very good news there. And anybody that's been around this channel for the last couple of years knows that I'm very high on Sam Cosmi. Kind of called it in last year's deep dive that there was going to be a Schefter bomb on his contract extension, and you were going to get a lot of people saying overpay or who's that. But viewers of the deep dives could say that they saw it coming, and that's exactly what happened. He gets a contract towards the top of the guard market, which has very quickly become actually underpaid because of what the last two free agent cycles have done to raise up that guard market. But I think it's at like $18 million a year for Cosmi. You pay him that every day of the week because he is one of the better run blocking guards in the league. He's got everything you could ask for as a run blocker, with the athleticism, the play strength, the grit and awareness to scratch and claw for leverage and have that kind of dickhead mentality you look for to finish blocks, and the desire to come out and, bang against 320-pound human beings 65 times a game. It takes a certain mentality to do that, and Sam Cosmi has that. And then as a pass blocker, he's pretty good. That's where he's held back from probably being in the conversation for who the best guards in the NFL are. I think Sam Cosmi's in the top 10. But he does actually lose to power on tape a decent amount. If you can isolate him with a good bull rusher, he's going to give up some pressures. So that's probably the one weakness in his game. But other than that, like, he's a former tackle. He can slide left and right. He can pick up stunts and still hang in there pretty well as a pass blocker. So it's not overall a weakness in his game. It's just he does take his losses in pass pro. But getting him back and back healthy is a big deal for this team. There's still a chance that doesn't happen. Or that he suffers a setback. Like, we're not all the way through the woods yet, but at this point in time, again, I'm feeling much better about kind of ranking this team as if Sam Cosmi is going to be good to go for them, and hopefully that's going to be the case. Then at right tackle, Andrew Wiley probably is going to have the edge to be the starter. He's been adequate for them, which is what they paid him to be coming over the last 2 years. And it's not like they had to give him some crazy Dan Moore contract or anything like that. It's pretty funny considering these guys are pretty similar caliber players. Yet Andrew Wiley was a 3-year, $24 million contract when he signed with Washington in 2023. And Dan Moore gets close to $24 million a year when they're both just like replacement level, adequate Band-Aid options at right tackle. And that's exactly kind of what the plan was here with Andrew Wiley, right? Like, Band-Aid starter. Doesn't have the play strength to consistently dominate in pass protection and not much of an impact in the run game. But he's held his own. We saw this offensive line play so much better last year. And, it's very much a weak link position, and he is not a true weak link. Now, part of the plan was we got to get more upside long-term at this position, and that's the first-round pick of Josh Connerly, and I actually really like that as a process for Washington. Is it going to be an impact first-round pick for this team that does have expectations to follow up a big year last year? No, he's probably not going to play this year, and even if he does, you would expect some rookie up and down moments, unless you get some like miracle, Tristan Wirfs, Rashawn Slater rookie season type of deal. But I don't think that was really on the tape or on the table for Josh Connerly. And frankly, this is not a criticism of Josh Connerly at all, but if he was really that good, like rookie all-pro level, he's probably going to edge out Andrew Wiley pretty clearly at this point, and that's just not where we're at. On tape, we saw a really fluid athlete, good technique, but just struggles with the play strength aspect of the position. But he is younger than a lot of these rookie tackle prospects, and he's got time now to sit and bulk up and pick the brain of Laramie Tunsil and even in Andrew Wiley, he's had to learn, how to win off of technique and stuff, and he's a good guy to learn from as well. So I think this is a really good setup for Josh Connerly to hit as a late first-round pick and be a really good franchise tackle for them down the road, and those gains should come in both phases. He has all the athleticism to be a better run blocker. It's just right now when he hits guys, they don't really move off their spot. So if he can get stronger and develop better core strength, that will help, obviously. And then in pass protection, his technique is good for a rookie already, but can get better. And then improving that anchor is going to go a long, long way against handling the many power rushers that you can face. So eventually we will see Josh Connerly, but that maybe ideally won't be this year, because that means Andrew Wiley's playing just fine at right tackle. If Wiley struggles, they might go to Connerly, and then it's more of a wild card. Like, is he going to be a good rookie? Is he going to be a bad rookie? That would be more volatile, I would say. Now, you do have some other depth here. Nick Allegretti is a very nice Band-Aid option if Brandon Coleman falters at left guard. So if Coleman is more of a weak link for a few weeks, you'd have to deal with it for a month, maybe 2 months. But you do have a nice ability to just go to Nick Allegretti, who's not a star or anything like that, but you know what he is. He's a tough dude and very much kind of the Andrew Wiley of their interior offensive line there. So having him as a backup left guard, or probably your week one starter at right guard if Sam Cosmi needs a little bit more time, that's great too. It's extra insurance to the downside of what we discussed with Sam Cosmi's injury. So you're very happy that he's here, considering those guards are your two wild cards on the offensive line. Reduces the risk of the downside at those two spots. Michael Dieter would be your backup center. He is a poor man's Tyler Biadasz. So same idea. Tough, gritty, unathletic center out of Wisconsin, just not as proven or as good as Biadasz. But he has played and even had to start like a couple seasons in Miami. So he's got a lot of experience, and as your eighth offensive lineman, you could certainly do a lot worse. So you really run 8 deep of guys. You should be pretty insulated for injuries. And then the rest of these guys, you got some veterans that have played a little bit. Trent Scott, Tyree Phillips, Bobby Hart, kind of making an NFL comeback here as well, along with some other guys like Michael Gallup. Low expectations if those guys had to play, but the idea of one of those guys competing for one roster spot here, it's not bad. And then Chris Paul, I would imagine they keep around just to see if he kind of develops, because he was a freak athlete coming out, and as a extra dart throw for some upside at left guard, kind of in the same thought process of what you're looking for in Brandon Coleman. I would imagine they want to keep him around to see what he can develop in year 4. But he was pretty far behind the 8 ball in terms of technique, so maybe something clicks at this stage, as it can happen for these guys. You're certainly not betting on it, but maybe. So there's your offensive line. It is a very solid group that very much could be a good group if Sam Cosmi can get back healthy, if Brandon Coleman can be a hit moving into guard. And then in the future, if those two things happen, and then Josh Connerly in 2026 can be a franchise right tackle, this team is building the foundations now of, hopefully deeper down the road, can be a core unit around Jaden Daniels. So that concludes all of our position groups for the offense. Let's summarize now the final offense for the Washington Commanders. It is a very balanced offense. They rank 9th in passing game and 12th in run game, and that gets them to be the 10th ranking overall offense. Needless to say, a very exciting unit here that made a lot of noise last year, and I'm excited to see what year 2 looks like for this group. Before we go to the defense, just a quick note for those closely following the series. If you notice some inconsistencies in terms of the pass game or run game or offensive line rankings, I do want to remind you that when I prepared for this deep dive, the good news on Sam Cosmi led to me bumping them up a little bit, which if you're cross-comparing some of the rankings in previous deep dives, the Commanders may have passed them up there. I know some people that like to take notes and follow those things very closely. I will remind you that I will be sharing my final spreadsheet with all of this stuff for free over there on my Patreon when the series concludes here in about a month. So you can go back and see the official final rankings for everybody, even though, you know, we're really only talking about teams moving up or down a spot. So it's not like it, you know, renders what I said about them useless or anything close to that. But yeah, let's move on to this defense here. A unit that started really bad, made some improvements, and they're hoping now can see a continuation of that trend here in year 2. So let's start with the defensive line. A fair share of movement here compared to what they had last year. So on the interior of the defensive line, they lose Jonathan Allen, who only played 30% of their snaps, but it is at least worth remembering that he had a career game against the Detroit Lions in their staple win last year. And then Fedarian Mathis, they cut ties with him, a bust of a second-round pick. They did make some additions, though. They signed Javon Kinlaw, of all people, to a 3-year, $45 million contract. All right, okay-ish addition. And then Eddie Goldman, Dan Quinn, and this front office, quite clearly, they like their rehabilitation project type of players there. Eddie Goldman very much fits the billing there. But I said neutral on the interior of the defensive line, 30% of your season of Jonathan Allen compared to what they're hoping will be a full season of Javon Kinlaw. It's about a push. I mean, Allen's a much better player when he's out there than Kinlaw. So neutral on the interior of the defensive line, but I did say slightly upgraded on the edge. They do lose Dante Fowler, who, you know, I agree with letting him go and not giving him a bunch of money and expecting him to play well, but he did play well for them last year. Double-digit sacks and 50 pressures. Those are a lot of pressures to replenish here. So they're hoping with Von Miller at 36 years old coming in here, along with Dietrich Wise and Jacob Martin, that the aggregate of those guys can fill those shoes and maybe a little bit more, where I said slightly upgraded on the edge. But getting into this defensive line here, this is probably the biggest concern and weakness of this Commanders team. I'll just say that out the gate. They rank as the 30th overall defensive line. They rank 23rd to 27th for pass rushes in the league. And then even worse for the run defense, 28th to 30th in D-line run defense. Not to say this group is useless, but certainly some concerns here. So let's start on the edge. It is going to be a massive rotation of pieces here outside of your number one guy in Dorrance Armstrong, who got a big free agent contract last year in the Trey Hendrickson breadth of contracts coming out of New Orleans, where Trey wasn't a full-time starter. And Commanders kind of saw how that worked for the Bengals and plucked Dorrance back over with Dan Quinn in Dallas. And we're hoping with him being more of a full-time starter that he could take that leap. Certainly didn't take a Trey Hendrickson-sized leap, but it still was a good contract. And they got, I think, what they paid for here in a productive, frankly, you know, solid number 2 caliber rusher here in Dorrance Armstrong, who unfortunately kind of has to be their full-time number 1 guy. And that's just straight up going to leave you at an inefficiency when you're comparing your pass rush to the rest of the teams in the league. Most teams have a better number 1 than Dorrance Armstrong, and that's just where the Commanders are at. They're trying to work at it here. But he's a solid player, man. He's got a little bit of power. He's got some good swipes. He wins on a lot of stunts, and he wins with a lot of effort sacks as well, but he is overall just a good balanced impact on this team. He's an okay run defender as well. So he is the guy that you're expecting is going to have to play again, like 700 to 900 snaps here, play all 3 downs. Whereas the rest of these guys probably going to be rotating where you're hoping to get the best, put these guys in the best positions to succeed relative to their skill sets. So Von Miller gets brought in here on a nice 1 year, I think $6.5 million contract. I think that's good money for Von Miller coming off a pretty good year in Buffalo last year in a rotational role. At his age, multiple ACL injuries in his career, can he play all 3 downs? Yeah, absolutely. And maybe when you get into a big playoff game in January, if he's available, they would actually trot him out there for 50 snaps and kind of bleed him dry, if you will. But as the season goes on, you should expect 15, 20 snaps a game from Von Miller, mostly coming in for those big third downs where he can be fresh and get the most out of his 36-year-old body to end drives and get after the quarterback. And that's what he did in Buffalo last year, and he actually had a very good pressure rate in that role. Had 40 pressures on 249 snaps, which was good for a 16% pressure rate. That is awesome. And if he can repeat that here, he would be this team's most efficient pass rusher, even more than Dorrance Armstrong. And that would be great if he could get what he did in Buffalo last year. He is a year older, though, not necessarily a guarantee, but it was a good signing with that kind of being your best case scenario. Any Commanders fan looking at this and saying, ooh, we got another great starter here, you got to be realistic about what he can do at his age. And we are going to see a lot of Clelin Ferrell, Dietrich Wise, Javonte Jean-Baptiste, and perhaps even Jacob Martin. So you might look at the graphic and be like, ooh, there's a lot of green there. You even have a stud pass rusher in Von Miller. You gotta rein it in a little bit and realize, yeah, you want to highlight Vaughn, and it's a nice signing, but you got to be realistic about how much playing time these other guys are going to get. And the rest of these guys just aren't very exciting, right? Clelin Ferrell is, total first-round bust, but he's settled in as an adequate rotational kind of edge 4 type. He can do a little bit of everything, can stop the run a little bit. He can occasionally win with some of his technique that he does have as a rusher, but limited traits, limited production, limited efficiency as a run defender, all of it. They do bring in Dietrich Wise on a 1-year deal as well. Another kind of rehabilitation / can we squeeze a little juice out of a veteran player who is regressing? He's a bigger bodied guy. Jalen Holmes had to play a lot last year as a rushing downs 3 technique and even a little bit of heavy-handed 5 technique on early downs. And, Holmes is just not that great of a football player. Dietrich Wise, I think they probably see as an upgrade in that role. But definitely with Von Miller not expecting to play much on first or even second down, we should see a lot of Dietrich Wise as that 5 technique to hopefully get this team into third downs where you can tap into Von Miller and some of these other guys to get after the quarterback. Again, putting guys in the best position to succeed. Then you got Javonte Jean-Baptiste, again there for a similar role, early down work. He is effectively useless as a pass rusher, but shouldn't have to play on passing downs as long as Von Miller is healthy. And then if Von Miller isn't healthy, and maybe even if he is, we could see a little bit of something from Jacob Martin, who, he's one of these guys that every year when I do 3 games of film prep on all these different teams, Jacob Martin seems to always flash on whatever team he's on, but he just never gets these big opportunities. Once upon a time was a part of a trade for Jadeveon Clowney with the Seahawks, where he went to Houston and was pretty good. He was actually more productive than Clowney as that trade kind of played out with Martin in Houston and Clowney in Seattle. But he's bounced around. He was on the Bears last year. We just did the Bears deep dive, so I just got through their tape. And again, I was like, yeah, Jacob Martin's still got some juice. He can win in a couple different ways as a rusher. So could he even be your Dante Fowler, pressure getter in this system? I would keep an eye on it. So they have a bunch of bodies, and they get a C+ grade for pass rush. They rank 20, as high as 23rd in the league. It's a practical group. I'm not going to say this is just a useless pass rush, but when you stack it up against other teams in the league, they just don't have the arsenal that a lot of teams have. But they do have some guys in the interior, the D-line as well. Daron Payne is just okay to good, The PFF grading profile always hates Daron Payne, and then when I watch the Commanders tape, I always relax a little bit. Like, he still gets off blocks in the run game. He still can do some stuff as a rusher, where he's not a horrible athlete. He can win with a bull rush. He has not lived up to his first-round hype, but they stand by him and choose to kind of let Jonathan Allen go probably Payne's last year, depending on how things kind of play out for them. But yeah, he's a balanced 3-down, goodish piece for them. Nothing too exciting, but you're at least happy you still have him here, because the rest of this group, you signed Javon Kinlaw. This one I didn't really understand. The Commanders got a lot of hate for this one. I at least, Kinlaw has been able to run some stunts, push the pocket. He's been a useful kind of fourth or fifth member of the defensive lines he's been on with the Niners and the Jets last year. And, he can get you 30, 35 pressures in a specific pass rush only role. The problem is he has had to play some run defense, and he's horrible at it. He's a taller player with poor play strength when he's, I guess, quote unquote, playing defense. Like he's got good power paired with his get off moving forward in his bull rush. But when he's standing up and trying to anchor as a run defender, it is hard to watch. So he does unfortunately play some run defense snaps because of his role. And it's tough. Like that's a downgrade, frankly, in terms of defending the run, where they already weren't very good last year. But he's going to play a good bit. And then Jerzon Newton in year 2 is going to get into the mix here as well. I think it's going to be pretty damn close to an even split, I would think, between Kinlaw and Newton, and maybe even Payne. But that's also going to be contingent on Newton staying healthy and playing well. I still believe in Johnny Newton. I had a late first, early second round grade on him, and he slips into the second round because of some injury concerns, and those did unfortunately surface early for him. It took some time for him to get fresh and healthy, but we did definitely see in pockets in certain games, we saw why we were so excited about him. He's got the bull rush. He's got the athletic twitch. He knows how to win as a rusher. He's undersized and not much of a run defender. I do still think we saw him in college able to be an okay impact as a 3 technique and split gaps and be that kind of penetrating run defending defensive tackle. Certainly more upside there than what we've seen from Kinlaw, where he's just a constant liability. But when Newton did have to defend the run last year, it was pretty rough to watch. So he is the biggest X factor wild card for this defensive line. He's got a lot of upside, and if he can hit here in year 2, that's really the one piece that could be a lot better, I think, than how we're projecting it out right now. Obviously, what they get from him will be a big deal in terms of this defense's upside. Then you've got Sheldon Day, Eddie Goldman, Carl Davis. These are your innings eater, early down run defender types that are adequate for what they are, but not impacts against the run, not plus players or anything like that. And then Jalen Holmes, I wouldn't be stunned if he just doesn't make this team. He played a good bit last year, but I really do think they have Dietrich Wise in that image. So maybe Holmes more on the practice squad and a backup to Dietrich Wise as that kind of hybrid end mold. And then we do at least have to finish this conversation up by mentioning they do get an impact from Frankie Louvu. And when he lines up on the edge, he does have legitimate ability to threaten the corner, some bend and some inside rush moves. Like he can actually win one-on-one reps lined up off the edge. But especially as a blitzing linebacker, he is just the definition of a Tasmanian devil. So you at least have to discuss him with the pass rush. 20% of his 1,200 snaps last year, 267 snaps on the season. That's 13 times a game. So not as much of a presence as if he were a full-time starting edge or anything like that, but certainly maybe more than any linebacker as far as usage is concerned, needs to be brought up, helping out this pass rush as well, and is factored into my grading and evaluation of this unit. Ultimately, I do think the pass rush will be solid. It was solid last year, not great. I think they can get something close to that, if not a little bit more, and certainly more if Newton can take that big leap. Whereas the run defense from the D-line is going to be a big concern, and it does drag this group down. It could theoretically be even worse now that Javon Kinlaw is going to be getting so much playing time here. That's definitely a key concern there. But let's go to the next level here with the linebackers, and this is a group where they didn't make much change. They brought Bobby Wagner back. They didn't lose anybody, and they did add Kane Medrano, Carson Schwessinger's running mate there at UCLA in the 6th round. But I did say neutral for the linebacker group. Really just running it back with this core. So you got Bobby Wagner still doing it. This team just loves their vets, man. And Bobby Wagner is a fascinating watch out there because it's hard to argue that he has the best mind for the position of any linebacker out there. And as slow and stiff as he is at his age, which it can be hard to watch him, kind of labor out there in space at times. It really can. Like, you can make a case he's the slowest starting linebacker in the league today. And that's going to have some, drawbacks in his overall game. But his mind, like, he's still pretty solid to good at everything because he just knows what he's doing, dude. So from a run defense perspective, he pairs the diagnostics with the ability to still get off blocks, and he's still somehow like the most consistent tackler in the league and brings a ton of stopping power still when he arrives, which helps him, play through the rep and finish tackles as well. So he's still top 10 to 15 in terms of run defense. He does have some limitations there, though, like against wide zone or crack toss. Like, he does struggle to get out to the perimeter and finish plays out in space. And there's also times, too, where he just can't scrape over the top like he used to. So he's not what he used to be, but he still has a lot of strengths in terms of run defense, getting off blocks and finishing tackles. And then in coverage, as you would expect, he's going to have his limitations. But outside of Fred Warner and maybe even above Fred Warner, like, Bobby Wagner is the best zone IQ in the league. So he's still able to understand where quarterbacks are trying to go with the ball and take away throwing lanes in zone coverage at least. He can't get a ton of depth or range in zone, but in that, little hook zone area that they ask him to play, he does his stuff. And then he had a career year as a blitzer last year, too. He can absolutely make his impact. We mentioned in the scheme breakdown, they throw both these guys at you as blitzers. And the fact that you don't know who's coming, but both are threats, is a big deal for this defense kind of scheming up the pass rush. But last year, Wagner had 28 pressures, which he only had one other season in his illustrious career with more pressures than that. So it's fun, like, legitimately good at it. You still see the power and ability to blow up running backs if they try to meet him in the hole, but he's savvy. Like, he'll spin off of blocks and twist and contort his way to the quarterback. So he makes his impact there. A very good player overall still, even if he's got some shortcomings. And then Frankie Louvu's just, he is, as I mentioned, the true Tasmanian devil. Having a Bobby Wagner next to him is a nice fit because Louvu doesn't play with a lot of like gap discipline or even a ton of like run diagnostics. They just have him come out and whatever assignment he's asked to do, they just want him to do it fast and like an effing madman. So whether that's blitzing or dropping into coverage where they want him to kind of take gambles and take risks, where you will see the occasional nice instinctive play from him, or in run defense too, it's like, hey, just run after everything. And you will see him lose gap discipline and take himself out of plays at times. That's where some of the negatively graded plays show up from him in like his PFF grade and stuff. Like, Louvu had a 61.7 PFF run defense grade last year, for example. I think that's a reflection of he's going to make some exciting, explosive, positive plays that get you those positive grades. And then on the flip side, as we mentioned, you're going to get some negative graded plays. And that's where he kind of lands in on a grading profile, like right in the 60 range. I still think him inside this defense with a more gap sound, structure-oriented Bobby Wagner, I still think his impact on the run game is better than like a 60 grade, for example. We give him a 79 good rating here for run defense, and just, again, rounds out as a very nice compliment to Bobby Wagner. So it's a very solid linebacker room, so much so that they rank smack dab in the middle of the league for me, 16th for overall linebacker, whereas they are much better as a run defending unit and some of the impact that we mentioned as well with the pass rushing, but they rank 8th to 14th with a B grade for run defense with this duo. And then the coverage is much closer to the bottom of the league, not horrible, but 22nd to 25th with a C grade for linebacker coverage. But a very balanced unit, and these guys play really well within this scheme as well. Now, there is some depth to talk about, certainly. Most notable for me is Jordan McGee in year 2. He was a very good developmental day 3 linebacker draft pick that I think pairing with Dan Quinn gets you really excited here, getting to learn from a Bobby Wagner. I've even heard some high praise of how they feel about him. He just didn't have to play last year because these guys were healthy. But I think in year 2 for McGee, if he did get that opportunity, and certainly in time he's going to. Wagner can't play forever, and even Luvu is up there in age, though he should be around here for a good bit. He's 29 years old. But yeah, I think McGee, whenever that opportunity comes, it's going to be an exciting moment for Commanders fans because I think he has the goods. He's a good athlete. He's got the physicality you look for. It's just he needed your classic young linebacker development. I think this was a really healthy setup for him with his talents to get that development. So I would be very interested once he does get out there. Not so much with the other guys. You got Nick Fresh Prince of Bel-Or, who once upon a time played fullback and might still play some fullback for this team at times. But he's a journeyman, veteran. Wouldn't expect much from him in a starting role. And then a couple other athletic developmental types. McGee to me is the most interesting developmental pick that they've made that I would bet on. But Kane Medrano has a lot of athletic traits. I certainly was not moved by him. He was an abysmal tackler, so that's going to be the first priority for them is hitting the tackle dummies and cleaning that up. He had a 26% missed tackle rate last year in his 5th season of playing time at UCLA. That is horrible. Like if you saw a small cornerback over 26% missed tackle rate, you would be concerned, let alone a linebacker. So that's pretty rough. And I still don't think he really knows what he's looking at either in terms of play diagnostics and that kind of stuff. But he can move, that's for sure. And then Dominique Hampton, probably a little bit better of a prospect, coverage-oriented linebacker guy, decent athletic traits, okay dart throws to have developing, and guys that can run on special teams as well, though obviously Medrano in special teams as well, got to learn how to tackle. But that does round out this linebacker room. Let's now go to our final position unit with the secondary, where they did make changes this offseason. So in the cornerback room, I do think this unit is upgraded. This should be the most improved unit on this defense, where they don't really lose anybody. Benjamin St-Juste played 62% of their snaps last year. I actually list him as addition by subtraction. I still think someone should try Benjamin St-Juste as a safety, but as a cornerback, he was a liability in a lot of matchups last year. And then Michael Davis snuck in for 10% of their snaps last year as well. But key additions here. You got to include Marshawn Lattimore, who they acquired midseason last year. Ended up playing 30% of this team's available snaps. And even then, he was kind of banged up when they did get him. I was a little surprised that he even kind of cleared physicals and stuff. It was kind of a weird, almost rushed midseason trade, but I think you're still hopeful he can get back out there and make an impact for you. But even if he doesn't, if he just wasn't there, adding Jonathan Jones, veteran, but still a solid addition, should be better than Benjamin St-Juste, certainly. And then second round pick of Trey Amos, maybe the biggest addition this group made. Big steal in the second round, in my opinion. So upgraded at cornerback, and then safety is slightly downgraded. Jeremy Chin did play well for them last year. He was a nice rehabilitation project that worked out for them. He heads to the Raiders, and then they are going with Will Harris. I am excited to talk about Will Harris. I don't think he's necessarily going to be horrible here, so I only said slightly downgraded there, making that change at safety. But overall, secondary should be better. But how much better is going to be the question. And with that, I did have this secondary as one of these key wild card factors of this team. There's questions at probably all 5 starting spots here to some degree. And right now, heading into the season, ranking these units damn near at their floor, I have the Commanders ranking with a C+ grade for the secondary, 22nd to 24th being the ranking there. But there is potential for this to be closer to top half of the league, if not a little bit better than that. But your first big question has got to be Marshawn Lattimore, who they traded a 3rd-round pick to acquire midseason last year. And this was a train wreck acquisition for the season. They were hoping this could maybe set them over the edge, and it's debatable if he even made an impact on this defense. He certainly struggled with the spotlight on him in the playoffs, having to go against his arch rival Mike Evans, and A.J. Brown certainly kind of embarrassed him in the conference championship game. So it probably can only go up from here in terms of what they really got from him last year. And it should be. It should be at least better than his impact last year, where I do think he was dinged up coming in and then probably felt the pressure to make an impact because this team did acquire him mid-season. And the team was, counting on him to fill into that CB1 spot. But even with that, like how good he can play here at 29 years old now, as someone that has been severely banged up now for 3 years, not just last season, but he played, about 2/3 of the season in 2023 and even less than that in 2022. This is a guy that has been through it, and at that age, at a position that this is about the age the average corner kind of falls off, there's legitimate questions of like just how much Marshon Lattimore has in the tank, and could this just be a straight up disaster trade kind of in the lights of a maybe J.C. Jackson edition, for example, of a guy that unfortunately he's just fallen off and isn't that guy anymore. There is a world where that happens. I still think he can play pretty well, kind of with a full season recover from whatever he was dealing with last year and settle in with this new team. That alone is tough, to come in and learn a completely different system and make an impact mid-season like that. So again, plenty of reason to believe they can still get a nice starter out of him. And then if he can fully recover, it's not like 29 years old for a guy that is as athletic in his prime as Marshon Lattimore has to be a death sentence either. Like, maybe they can get a superstar number one corner out of Marshon Lattimore here. Like, the spectrum here could not be wider. And it makes him a very challenging player to rank. I think it's more important to just understand the spectrum, and that how he plays this year is going to go a long way towards defining the success of this defense. But you do have some other options here if this is just a train wreck, and maybe week 8 you do have to just cut Marshon Lattimore and go with these other guys. But they have the other guys at least to make that move and not panic. So your other two starters for now look like Mikey Sainristil in year 2 and Jonathan Jones, who they bring over from New England. And these guys are relatively similar players, kind of at a meeting of the roads, going in opposite directions. Guys that kind of have slot and outside corner flexibility. They're different skill sets, but similar in that sense, where they can play inside and out. Sainristil coming off an exciting rookie season. Jonathan Jones, has been a very good number 2 corner throughout his career, but he has shown signs of regression, frankly, into his 30s, as you would expect. But Sainristil was pegged as a slot corner coming out of Michigan. And I do think if they want him to be their primary slot corner, he can recapture that hype as who was the number 1 slot corner in his draft. Though I argued that if you really wanted to, play 4D chess, that Tyke Smith was actually the best slot corner in that draft. But I still liked Mikey in the second round where they took him. I questioned if giving Cooper DeJean to the Eagles to trade down and then take Sainristil and Ben Sinnott was the smartest idea, and Cooper DeJean had inside-out flexibility, and he as well was probably the best slot corner in the draft, but that's neither here nor there. We are focused on these Commanders here, and Sainristil was really good in his rookie season. Not Cooper DeJean good, but really good. Showed off the zone IQ, showed that when he gets targeted down the field, he's not going to panic. He can find the ball. He can recover. The ability to step outside was really nice. It might not be the highest upside projection for him, though I think he can at least be a good number 2, kind of in the image of DJ Reed's like a really good number 2, but kind of same idea, like a frisky, smart, playmaking, outside corner that's just undersized. Yeah, occasionally you're going to miss the range, the reach rather, if you get matched up on a T. Higgins or an A.J. Brown or something like that. Like, yeah, you might get bodied at times when you're that small trying to go against bigger wide receivers. But for the most part, he can absolutely play outside. He can play inside, and wherever he's playing, he's going to make an impact in your secondary. I don't think he's like really at risk of being a liability from a coverage perspective. The run defense should only get better in time, and the playmaking's really nice. So just good, balanced player that you shouldn't have to worry about and is going to raise the floor of your unit. Then you got Jonathan Jones, another wild card of sorts here in that just how hard is the regression gonna hit here another season at 32 years old. We certainly saw a drop off in lockdown consistency from him going from his age 30 season in 2023 where he was still pretty good, and then in 2024 where he got picked on a lot more and gave up 7 touchdowns last year for New England and looked like a 31-year-old version of Jonathan Jones, right? It's not anything against him, but it's going to happen at some point. So not some lockdown option or anything like that, but he still made some plays last year and showed that he can run. So bringing him in here raises the floor of this group, I think, and he probably will edge out Trey Amos, the rookie coming in here, but whether or not he holds on to that job, I think is going to depend on how far Jonathan Jones is declining and then how quickly Trey Amos can ascend and try to take this job. Like, that could really happen at any point here. That might be a narrative that develops throughout training camp here. That could develop week 4, week 12. Eventually Trey Amos is going to be the starter here, and Jonathan Jones is probably going to be the first man out. It's just, does Jones hold on to the job for the year or not? But I love Trey Amos, man. I thought to get him in the second round was unbelievable value, especially in a cornerback class that fell off really steep at around that end of the second round territory. Relative to other draft classes, I don't remember one that was as thin heading into day 3 of the draft as this year's cornerback class. So to still be able to get Trey Amos when you went offensive tackle in the first round, like I'm sure they thought about Trey Amos in the first round. So just unbelievable value. One of the steals of the draft, in my opinion. And yeah, they've got some veteran options ahead of them that are going to try to push the rookie out of the lineup for now. But there is so much balance and stability in his game. My pro comp on him was James Bradbury, as he's not the fastest guy, but that's really the only knock on him, is he will occasionally lose due to his speed, but he had outrageous zone IQ and reactionary mental quickness to squeeze routes, anticipate route breaks, and close that space in coverage from off zone really, really well. But he can go physical press man coverage because he's got the size. So bump and run in this system, he can absolutely do that. He plays the run really well. There's just so much to like in his game. He even turns his head around and finds the ball, which is a key trait for corners. So, whether it's week 1 or week 1 next season, eventually Trey Amos is going to be a starter. And basically the floor is just raised here, because if you're worried about Jonathan Jones regressing or Marshawn Lattimore just not having it, you have that backup plan of Trey Amos that just fell into your lap. So that's awesome. And then you're 4 deep with that. And then you have Noah Igbenogany. Look, having to watch him as a starter last year, it wasn't ideal. But now he's a CB5 with these new additions. So that's much better. And he's got inside-out flexibility as well. So that's totally fine now. Kayvon Seymour's been more of a special teamer. That's probably your 6. You got 4 other names kind of duking it out for maybe Kayvon Seymour's job, but probably not. And then you do have questions at safety, certainly, like Quan Martin in year 2, getting to step back and play more true safety, which he's still relatively new at. Like, he played mostly slot corner at Illinois, so it's an adjustment for him, but I think he handled it well in his first season, and the arrow's pointing up on him, and he played his football down the stretch. He had the pick 6 in the Lions game, and I think he started to get involved against the run, and it just was a little bit more up and down for him, but I do still believe in him now. He was a second-round pick in 2023, and now he heads into his 3rd season with a clear runway as this team's starting safety, and he's kind of a breakout candidate for them. I thought he had really good upside with a lot of speed on the back end. I like the ball skills. I like his ability to come down and hit. It's just getting more comfortable as more of a deep safety, going through those reads from the back end, having that proper risk assessment. It's tough. It is a tough transition to make. Not everybody can make it, but I think he showed good promise to do that last season. And then Will Harris, sneaky little pickup here. I'm not going to put the up arrow on him necessarily, which basically is me saying I expect them to exceed the ranking that I put on these players. It's a little different with Will Harris, where it's more like the eye emoji, where I'm just interested to see him this year. Kind of like I said with Martin on the defensive line, like every year there's some of these under the radar vets that when I do my film prep for these teams, certain vets stand out, and it's not like I'm out there capturing all these plays that I see that I can share with you guys in the series. Because by the time I realized he was playing at an underrated level, I've already passed up the opportunity to record those timestamps and stuff. But that basically happened here with Will Harris, where like I did the Saints for my initial deep dive. They came in 32nd this year, and it's like, hey, Will Harris actually played pretty well. And then I get to this Commanders deep dive, and I'm like, oh, Will Harris is starting for the Commanders. They must have seen the same thing I saw on tape. And, you know, one of those guys last year was Zach Bond. So coming over from New Orleans. I'm just saying, it's funny to think about, but he made some plays on the back end, and he has an interesting narrative as well, where he came into the league as a slot corner, outside corner. He's played strong safety, free safety. He's never had a home. Last year in New Orleans, he played safety, and like I said, he passed the eye test for me on tape. He's a really good athlete, and I'm interested to see how he can play here. Like kind of a sneaky breakout call here. Totally unproven. Not a ton of high-end production or anything in this spot on the record, but we'll see. I'm fascinated, and he's got a clear opportunity to be the starter here because I'd like to think this team is done with the Percy Butler experience as a starter. They do seem to like him. They like his speed, and presumably they like his work ethic, but it hasn't led to results. I like him as a special teamer. I'll say that, but he just, even though he, has the 4.3 speed on the back end, he just hasn't been able to anticipate and be a playmaker or be an impact in run defense. So I certainly would hope it's Will Harris and not Percy Butler. Maybe something clicks for Percy here in year 3, year 4, whichever it is. But even outside of Percy, there's just not really a whole lot to mention with this safety room. Jeremy Reeves is a career special teamer. They love him in that role. One of the better special teamers in the entire league, but just hasn't, been a safety impact for them. Though when he did play, I think it was the last full Ron Rivera year, he stepped in and actually graded out pretty well, but not expected much there. So very clear runway for Will Harris to get this opportunity. If he isn't good, though, then, yeah, they're going to have some issues on the back end because they just don't have a whole lot of other options. But it's not a bad secondary. It's just a very unproven secondary that is clearly a team that, if they can hit their upside, is going to be a core variable of how this Commanders team can, kind of get better on paper and set themselves up, more likely to get back to the NFC Championship and maybe even beyond. But right now, as we are looking at these units and this team at their floor, the Commanders defense ranks 22nd for me, which is, about where they ended the season, I think, last year. Just trying to continue to build off of that. They're balanced for the most part, 22nd in terms of pass defense and 24th in terms of run defense. And, the highest rankings here going to the coaching. At the end of the day, development and getting this team to keep heading in the right direction is the best thing that they kind of got going for them right now. And at least for now, the roster talent to develop is specifically in that young secondary. I think the linebackers and defensive line are mostly, we know what they are. The one main exception there that could make a bigger impact on this front seven would probably be Johnny Newton, their second-round pick from last year. But let's take a look at the special teams, our final side of the ball here, if you will. And they did make some changes this offseason. Commanders fans very excited that they are going with more of an established kicker. They rotated through Austin Seibert and Zane Gonzalez last year. They signed Matt Gay over from Indianapolis, who's been mostly steady. The one other move there is they do lose Olamide Zaccheaus, who can do some punt return stuff, but still upgraded for this special teams from their offseason changes. But to rank this special teams unit, where we use my special teams formula, pushing up my glasses here. But they came out 18th for overall special teams with a B- grade. Pretty just solid across the board. Matt Gay coming in has been the 17th graded out kicker over the last 2 years. The main weakness here is the punter in Tress Way, who actually gets the 32nd grade. He has really struggled getting up there in age. But they got some solid return men. Austin Eckler can do some good stuff on kicks. Luke McCaffrey can do kicks and punts. Pretty solid there. And then their team grades were really good last year, despite some kicker and punter problems. They still ranked 9th for the DVOA team grade last year, 13th for the PFF team grade last year. I think that would be a reflection of Dan Quinn and the coaching and the culture here really shining through on the special teams, where these guys, their coverage was, I'm not going to act like an expert on the matter, but when they struggled at kicker and they struggled at punter and they still were top third in special teams grades, I would like to assume that means their coverage grades were spectacular on special teams. So that, I think, makes sense to me with some of the depth at linebacker and the coaching that they bring to the table there. But let's start to tie a ribbon on all of this as we reflect on this team's strengths, weaknesses, and pivotal factors. There's a lot of balance with this team. I don't think they have a ton of defining strengths and a ton of defining weaknesses. Unfortunately, one of those defining strengths is their quarterback, which goes a long way for these teams. But then I also put down the just overall coaching and team culture. I think their defensive coaching is really good. Their offensive coaching is really good. And the culture, as we've discussed, is really good. Those are some really amazing strengths to have. As far as the weaknesses, I don't have a lot of true weaknesses for this team outside of the defensive line. I think it's a serviceable unit, generally speaking, but when you stack it up against all the other D-lines in the league, it certainly is towards the bottom of the league. And again, we rank them 30th for the overall D-line ranking. And honestly, there's not a ton of upside for it to show up as a non-weakness. As we turn our eyes towards the wild cards, the true pivotal factors that this team just really would benefit from these units seeing some green lights and question marks going in a positive direction. Jer'Zhan Newton does show up there with that defensive line. If he can be kind of a star pass rushing defensive tackle in year 2, that would probably be enough for me to say the D-line's not a true weakness. And then you would have a team that doesn't have any defining weaknesses. But if you're talking about getting back to a conference championship, you would still want to be a team that has more items in the strengths category. And I think the biggest one to look for there would be Deebo Samuel. If Deebo Samuel can get back into shape and be his, something closer to his old self, which I don't know if that's likely, but I don't think it's impossible. If that could happen, weaponry would pair with the quarterback there as true strengths for this team. And then I think the offensive line can get closer to being a strength for this team than a weakness. They already rank 15th. If Brandon Coleman can be a hit in year 2, especially, that would go a long way. But you also have to factor in Sam Cosmi and the injury. Can he get back fully healthy? And then do we see Josh Connerly in year 1? There's upside there as well. But could this offensive line, in a best-case scenario, push being a top 10 unit paired with a really good group of weapons and Jaden Daniels? Now we're really talking about this being a championship caliber, dare I say, unstoppable offense. And then the last thing would be the secondary. Going back to the defense there, I think that's where the upside lies with the defense. Question marks really at every single spot with young players heading in the right direction. Sainra still, Amos, Martin, a lot of exciting but still relatively unproven talent there. And then some of your veteran pieces with Marshawn Lattimore. What is he? Jonathan Jones, how much has he regressed at his age? And then even Will Harris, I think, has a little bit of a wild card element to him as well. I think there's upside for that to be a close to a top 10 secondary, which could show up as more of a strength for this Commanders team. So those are your key aspects for this team. Obviously, ranking 14th in these power rankings, 10th on offense, 22nd on defense. I do still see this as a playoff caliber football team, but there are pockets of last year's season where they won a lot of close games. The schedule gets a lot harder this year, as we're going to look at in just a second. And at some point, I have to mention that, like, a lot of how we perceive this Commanders team coming out of last year is based on the fact that they went into Detroit and won that game. And that was a spectacular performance. But you also have to remember, like, all right, Detroit shit the bed in that game. They played horrible. And you got standout performances from Diami Brown, who's not on this team anymore. Jonathan Allen had a monster game in that game. Dorrance Armstrong had the best game he had on his season and maybe in his career in that game. Mikey Sainristil still had the best game he's had in his career in that game. I'm not trying to come off as a hater, but when you really reflect on that being the core reason people are excited about the Commanders, they really came out and rolled on, if they rolled a 20-sided die, if they had to roll a 20 to win that game or an 18 or higher, they rolled a 20 in that game for sure in terms of getting all the best case outcomes from their roster and Detroit getting the worst case from theirs. You can't just assume that that happens again. This team does have to get better in some of these areas to climb up on paper and put themselves in a more realistic situation to repeat those results next year. So that's just kind of where I'm at, generally speaking. Not to say they can't do it, but let's take a look at their schedule here. And it is much harder. They have certainly some winnable games in there when we're starting to now talk about real playoff caliber teams. So you expect they'll take care of business. Giants at home in that division. They get the Raiders at home week 3, at Miami week 11. Miami, we'll see. But they get the Giants again. Like, you got some easier games in there. But outside of the Giants, this division is really tough. Although we'll see if Micah Parsons gets traded. That could change things for Dallas pretty damn quickly. But they did draw the AFC West this year. So you've got to go to Kansas City. You've got to go to the Chargers. You have to host Denver. Those are challenging games. And then they got the NFC North as well, which, based on our rankings here, I think we can say is the best division in the league, at least from top to bottom. None of those games are going to be cakewalks for the Commanders. I think they're capable of beating any of those teams in the NFC North. Packers, Lions, Vikings, Bears, but not going to be gimmies. So at the end of the day, it's a tall order for this team to repeat what they did last year. And when you do go to the NFC Championship, you're going to have the odds set a little bit higher for you. So they have a 9.5 over-under heading into the season. They are 9th in Super Bowl odds. They are behind the Eagles, but plus 220 to win this division. They're saying, 1 out of 3 times the Commanders do win this division. When it does have an amazing Eagles team and a good Cowboys team in it, like, those are lofty expectations. And I just don't know, man. I don't know that, like, I'm rushing to the casino to bet against the Commanders. I think Jaden Daniels is really freaking special, and he showed that, you're not really a guy you do want to bet against. If you put a gun to my head and said, do the Commanders go higher or lower on 9.5 wins? It's a really hard one for me. It really is. I maybe lean the under, and this team being, kind of similar to last year's Texans, where amazing young quarterback, huge expectations heading into year 2. And I think we all agree that Texans team didn't quite, meet their hype. They did end up winning a playoff game, but, like the Commanders here, those Texans were a team that a lot of people were picking to go to the Super Bowl. Like, I think, gun to my head, that's probably more likely, but again, not a team I'm taking my own money and betting against either. This team burned me last year, and it's just not a team I want to bet against. Like, I think it's going to be a really fun team to watch. I think Jaden Daniels is just absolutely spectacular, and having any reason to cheer against him would not increase my enjoyment of football. So I'm excited to hear from you guys and Commanders fans especially, if you think this was fair analysis or if I am just a Commanders hater. What do you think of them ranking 14th? Do you think that's a good spot, or do you think it is too low? I don't think anyone's going to really come out and say that's too high and that they should rank much lower than this. But yeah, let me know in the comments down below. Let me know if you think I missed anything as well. And please do hit that like button on the way out. Again, it really does help me out. So if you're still here 2 hours in and you haven't done that, I really appreciate it on your way out if you could do that. And make sure you're subscribed as well. But that is all we've got, and I will see you within the next couple of days for our number 13 team in these deep dives. Who do you think that's going to be? Let me know in the comments down below. But until then, peace out.